appliances.
Keep going, Akram. We had some technical problem with Jen, who was recording, getting hit by lightning. Apparently, I hope she's all right, but she's recording again now. I'm assuming it's just her power or Telstra supply, but it looks like we're back on the recording front. So keep going.
Yep, no worries. The next topic is commercial kitchen fire suppression. This is a summary. This, like I said at the beginning, is a significant topic, and we're hoping to have a webinar, I think the very next webinar, which would discuss this more in depth. Just for commercial kitchen fire suppression systems, there are three main systems. So you get your fire sprinklers, which is probably the most common system here in Australia. The requirements for a fire sprinkler system are obviously quite expensive because there's a lot of infrastructure required to install a fire sprinkler system. And the requirements for specific spaces are dependent on the building type, the location, and the space. And as you know, when it is triggered, in addition to putting out the fire, it also causes a lot of liquid damage because there's a large volume flow rate of water that flows through those sprinkler systems. Now, probably in the last 25 or 30 years, especially overseas in the USA, wet chemical systems have become very popular. Some of you might be familiar with brands such as Ansell or Amerex, which are two of the most popular wet chemical fire suppression systems. So these systems are standalone. They're attached to your hood. They don't require electrical or any hydraulic connections to them. They can, of course, still be connected to your fire services board or to your gas connections, so that it sort of switches them off in the event of a fire. But some of the main benefits of it are it protects not only the appliances, it also protects your duct as well, because it's got nozzles pointing into your duct, and the cleanup is quite easy relative to a fire sprinkler system. So it discharges the chemical, and when the cylinders are empty, it stops. And quite often I've seen this myself firsthand. It is a lot easier to clean it up. You probably have a day's downtime in the restaurant, provided none of the appliances are damaged in the event of the fire. But the cleanup is very quick, and you'd be able to be up and running the next day. The third type of system is wet chemical plus water. So it's a combined system. We see them occasionally. It's not specified frequently. One such brand is an Ansell Piranha system, which essentially has the same wet chemical system, but once the wet chemical is expended, it will start sprinkling water through the same nozzles. So you're relying on the fire brigade to come up and turn the system off. So once again, that ends up being could end up being quite damaging to the space, because as you can imagine, a lot of water does flow through those nozzles, and the cleanup will be significant. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the few topics that we've covered in this large standard.
Thanks, Akram. I've got quite a few questions to go through here. I might try and go through these, and there's no particular order. And if anybody who's asked the question does want to open their mic and specifically make a comment, please feel free. So I think I'm going back to where we sort of finished off. Brian Gore has asked, can griddle plates and filters be discussed, and if the standard AGA has been corrected?
So that, I believe, is an ESV standard, especially here in Victoria, where they consider griddle plates to be similar to char grills, and the distance requirement is 1350. So when you go to get your ESV certification, that's where that issue is stumbled upon, but it's not a AS 1668.2 regulation.
I'm not sure then if Enzo's got any comments there.
Yeah, there has been some confusion around griddle plates, and we are actually in the process of revising the gas installation standard in that regard. So we looked at 1668 and the wording that was used in that. And we now, we'll soon be publishing a revised edition of the gas installation standard where it talks about the heat source, the grease filters, whether being a naked flame or permanently concealed flame. So, yeah, we try to provide a bit more guidance around, you know, the clearance from a griddle plate, depending on what sort of griddle plate it is. So if it's a griddle plate that's a solid plate that conceals a flame, then it's 600. But if it's a griddle plate that allows, you know, for naked flame to come through, then it's 1050 or greater. If the possibility exists for flaring and ignition of the food. So, you know, I think the term griddle plate is used very loosely, and it can be anything from a solid plate to a grill, if you know what I mean.
And so Brian Gore, who asked a question here, that was discussed late last year and was supposed to be ratified. But a griddle plate is a flat plate. It's not a grill. And that's where it had been going on for such a long time that the measurement then all of a sudden got changed in the standards and caused a lot of concern with sign-offs.
So Brian, we had a project in the Melbourne CBD that was signed off in December, and this exact conversation was played out. And upon the inspector seeing that it was a solid plate, he adopted the advice that Enzo just gave, that he treated it as 600 high, but it is acknowledged that it's you know, not well written and it is ambiguous. So I would presume if you've got a project that's struggling with a sign-off today, common sense should be able to prevail and you should be able to get that signed off.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we've steered away from using the word griddle in the next revision of the standard. So it's more about, you know, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, interestingly enough, and I'm just trying to look up the commercial catering standard as we speak for 4563 to see how it defines a griddle plate, because there has been various definitions of that term in the past. So yeah, as it stands at the moment, now I know there's a revision of AS 4563 coming out, but it does say that a griddle plate is a solid plate heated from below that is used to cook food directly on its surface, also known as a dry fry plate, hamburger plate, or grill plate. Well, that's a griddle rather than a griddle plate, but that's the definition of a griddle.
So, Brian, are you comfortable with what's been discussed there, or do you need any more clarification?
I think it's going to go on until it gets changed. So it just depends on the day on who the inspector is and what his understanding is. I think we just need some common terminology put in place. So it'll get us through.
Thanks. I've got a comment from Marcel. I'm not sure, Marcel, whether you want to open your mic and sort of, it's more of a comment than a question. I can read it out if you don't. You still there? I'll read out the comment anyway, if you want to chip in. Overhangs are specifically applicable when using AS 1668 Part 2 2012 prescriptive airflow calculations, refer clause 3.5. When using the airflows of other proven calculation methods, you must apply the overhang rules used for these standards, refer clause 3.6. Marcel hasn't chipped in. I'm not sure, Rob, if you've got any comments around that?
Yeah, so VDI 2052 doesn't use a specific overhang, it uses an angle, and from memory I think it's either 12 or 15 degrees. So depending on how high your device, you know, your cooking appliance is and how low the hood is, you may find that using that alternative technique that you can simply stick to VDI 2052. So usually VDI 2052 is a problem in Australia because it requires the designer who may be providing kitchen exhaust 12 months before the shop is let. They need to assume or make some sort of provision for exhaust air quantities. So all of 1668 in the prescriptive method has this presumption that the area underneath the hood and how much air it will need. The value of VDI 2052 is that if you've got cooking appliances that may be, for example, induction or have lower cooking intensity, you can see either more cooking line for the same amount of air, or you can do basically you can do other things. But the overhang is driven by, in the German code, is driven by the angle to get to the inside edge of that hood.
Great, thanks, Rob. There's a question here around the gas broilers again. I think Boris couldn't hear the answer. He's saying, sorry, was it 200 millimeter for gas broilers? I couldn't hear it clearly. I think, Enzo, you've answered that above, which is gas broilers require 1350 clearance. Table 6.9 ASNZ S5601.1. I'll just double check that I'm reading that right.
Yeah, that's correct.
Cool, thanks. Mark Minnis has asked, the ventilation standard in the UK changed some time ago for charcoal. Is there any likelihood this will be done in Australia?
That is a difficult question to answer. We often hope that the kitchen ventilation standard in Australia does kind of keep up with more modern technologies and cooking devices from overseas, and particularly from Europe. But it's not slated for rejuvenation for another few years yet. So I don't. The answer is I don't know. The UK code and the use of charcoal, we have that particular conversation going on at the moment, and the advice that we were given is it will need to be done through a performance solution. So there's a lot of really good things around that British code. The fact that it is a British code enables people to do a performance solution in Australia with a lot of authority or a lot of reliability that it'll be approved. But to make it easier or more accessible for everyone, it would be better if it was in the prescriptive part of the ventilation code, the look up and follow this chart part of the ventilation code.
Thanks, Rob. There's a specific question here from Craig Hackstead. Gas combi steamer flue distance to filters, what would be required?
I have a view on this. When I think of a gas combi, I'm just thinking really of a combi. It's venting at the top, there's a door overhang and an opening. The fact that the cooking is generated by gas only really raises one or two concerns, and one is the ventilation of a potential leak of the gas and the potential fire of that system. But in terms of distances to filters, I don't believe we need to do anything about it being a gas device versus it being an electric combi device. So we regularly take the oven flue off the top and pipe it almost directly into the hood, still through a grease filter, but very, very close. Or obviously we look at options such as ventless appliances, which would have nothing.
Thanks, Rob. There's a question here, Adiri, and I think this must be referring to those distances to filters. What if you are replacing like for like? Sure, Akram, whether you've got a response to that one?
Replacing the filters?
I think replacing a piece of equipment for a like piece of equipment. Is there any change, I'm assuming, to requirements?
I think if you're making any change to the cook bank, similar to the electric code, if you were replacing your oven, if you're putting a new oven in your house, for example, you would have to make sure that electric circuit would comply with today's standards. So in the same way, I would say if you were replacing an appliance, you would need to ensure that the system was compliant with today's standards.
So unfortunately, I have a different view to Akram. I think his comments around electrical and I'd imagine for hygiene and water are exactly correct. But if you are, the recipient of a cooking appliance and you are doing a genuine like for like, so no additional power, the dimensions are effectively the same or better, then I believe you should be able to simply pull one out, put one in, and tell the health department that it is a like for like replacement. So there's a lot of precedent for like for like replacement. The safety concerns that Akram raises is really the common sense part. We have a thing in Brisbane where a very well-known old restaurant is now facing the situation that it's signed off by council, but it is not insured any longer for this type of like for like argument. Admittedly, they're not replacing one appliance; they're replacing about 7. But different people may have a different view, and I respect Akram's view. I just think that it ought to be able to be approved as a like for like replacement.
Enzo, you got your hand up there. Is that in response to that particular question?
No, it was response to something earlier, but I'm happy to continue for others to continue, and then I'll come back to mine was in relation to fluing into canopies. That's all.
Well, just go for it now, if you don't mind, Enzo.
Okay, well, look, one thing that the gas technical regulators and the AG6 committee are looking at for future work is situations where you've got appliances that have been designed to operate with the flue, where the flue is expected to flue the combustion products to outside atmosphere. We have had some situations we've come across where we've had an appliance in one room that's meant to be flued to outside, and then that flue has been diverted into an adjacent room into a canopy, and that's not on. So that's something we'll be addressing in a future revision of the standard, but it's been earmarked as future work.
Thanks, Enzo. I'll move on to a question here from Kathy Goodwin, which was quite relevant based on that previous question. What organised to police these standards after installation? Rob, do you want to?
Yeah. So the regulatory framework is that there is a national code which is part of law, and then there is if you like, an inspection and regulatory position which is usually administered by the states, and in typical style is literally just delegated down to the health departments within each of the councils. So we will get a request from Brisbane City Council to go and look at what they think is a dodgy overhang. Certifiers who are signing off people's designs, usually they are aware of, if you like, the basics, and they will insist that the mechanical engineer clarifies or certifies the location of the hood. So a really interesting conversation has been with solid fuel. The bottom of the pit, you go and put timber on it and you light it up and you start cooking. Where do you start to measure the distance to the filter? Some engineers have been measuring the floor of the pit, which clearly is erroneous. But how big is the flame? And you go into some of the things, the blackened soot shadow on the side of the wall shows that there's been some fairly large flames that have been cooked. So there is a sense of people applying kind of a common sense and judgment. But it is the certifier who look after new builds, and it is the health department that will come along and see whether the operators change things afterwards.
I'd like to go back to the comments that you made around the points that I made earlier regarding the errors in the standard. I'm finding a lot of the things that you're saying not really helpful, to be honest, because we're often changing appliances or quoting a customer to install an oven or something in their premises. It could be something as simple as a childcare centre or something like that. But you're giving answers saying that, yes, there's mistakes in the standard's old. And then you sort of made the comment that, oh, we're getting off point, let's move on. What are we supposed to follow? This meeting is supposed to be about the standard and the obligations related to it. So when that customer says, why do I need a hood XYZ size? What are we supposed to show them other than the standard?
You're exactly supposed to show them the standard, and there are also some workarounds where practical sense can be applied. When we talk about an aged care facility or I'm going to call it a quasi or a lightweight commercial facility like a childcare, there are certainly lots of avenues and opportunities to diminish this, but make no mistake, the code is a law. There needs to be a permanent sign-off despite change. It is perfectly legitimate to say, well, this old oven is no longer working and I've just replaced it like for like. That doesn't mean we need to do a new design and certification. But in all cases, both the code and our insurers are looking for an audit trail for who is responsible. So in your position, unless you're going to take responsibility for deviating from the code, you should be presenting the code.
But when the code has
errors, yeah, I get it. I mean,
on this in the same standard on different pages, there are different answers.
Yes.
So if the customer says, well, I'm looking at page whatever.
Yep.
And we're saying, yes, but on another page, it says it's got to be bigger. What's the answer?
Yeah, so the answer is who is taking responsibility for this. So most of the time, not always, we see there is a mechanical engineer. He will apply his judgment. He brings along his insurance. He is responsible for providing the design certification statement. That's on him. Now, the code is full of what you've described, and it is, I guess, a function of little band-aids and bitses and things that they've done over the years. I have seen other codes in work in other parts of the world, and I don't feel like I should be defending the Australian code, but I also don't think it's that much wrong with it. In this case, the kitchen code just has not had enough, I guess, checking before issue, and we have these anomalies, these ambiguities that you're speaking about.
But you haven't answered my question. If there's two different measurements in the standard,
yeah,
the jobs we're talking about, I'm not talking about a multi-story building with a mechanical engineer.
No.
We're just talking about small jobs, independent restaurants or whatever it may be. There's no mechanical engineer involved.
So that may have been the way that you've practiced in the past. That way is certainly not permitted any further in New South Wales. The way that the Queensland Code for construction has been written, that is also highly unlikely to be ever approved. They don't necessarily need a professional engineer in Queensland. They're looking for somebody that has experience. But again, whoever that person is, they are saying, I have the experience to make this decision. So coming back to the ambiguity issue, the normal way it's resolved is to say you take the worst case of which of those dimensions are used. I'm an advocate for common sense. So in particularly the case that you're talking about where there's not a lot of perhaps load through a childcare centre, a sensible mechanical engineer that is able to take responsibility can argue on a few different fronts that he's going to adopt this lower value. And none of that should be stuck in his mind. It needs to be put down in a document somewhere.
So you're effectively saying, sorry, then that a mechanical engineer needs to be engaged anytime there's a flue to be done. That
is the code. It needs to be somebody who is credentialed to be able to take that responsibility. We are often called, I'm not kidding you, our cafe is opening up in a week and the certifier will not permit anyone except for a mechanical engineer to come and provide a design statement. And there are some very experienced people, probably the people that are listening in on this conference that are in a position to sign that certificate. But what the certifier is worried about is he's making a statement to the public that the appropriate people have worked on this, and they have been able to make the judgment that you've just described.
I might just have to move it on. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I appreciate that that's a complex question and maybe you haven't got the answer exactly you wanted, but I think we have sort of given you some insights there. So I'll just move that on. Just on the low height ceiling point, someone has mentioned that ventilated ceilings may work in low height rooms as an engineered solution. That gives me a chance to Jacques. I don't know if you want to comment on that. You're on mute.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And that was one comment when Akram mentioned engineered solution. Ventilated ceiling is one of them. And we worked with Rob before 2012 when ventilated ceiling were not part of the Australian standard to have it. Now, thankfully, it is part of the Australian standard. And yes, that can be a solution where in some cases it's either ventilated ceiling or not kitchen or no kitchen at all. And we have lived that several times.
Thanks, Shark. I'll move on to a question from Scott King. He's asked whether it's appropriate. I think it is appropriate, this question. Could you please give us a quick overview of domestic appliances versus commercial appliances specified for use in childcare, schools and canteens? At what point do we need to transition to commercial hoods? And are there any other considerations? We have been getting pushback around 8 kilowatt total load for the oven and cooktop as the threshold for commercial performance. Is this correct?
I'll
Yeah.
I'll stick my hand in. Actually, Enzo is often putting his hand up. Why don't you take this one, Enzo?
I think the answer is a relatively simple one, and that is it depends on what the appliance has been certified to. So if it's been certified to AS4563, it's a commercial appliance. If it's been certified to, say, for example, AS/NZS 5263 Part 1.1, it's a domestic cooking appliance.
In the ventilation code, the distinction between commercial and domestic is determined or based on just how much cooking are we going to see. So we often argue that a early childcare centre that may have 3 domestic dishwashers, under bench, one for each classroom or one based on religious grounds for different types of cleaning. Those are all domestic appliances which have a domestic consumption pattern. When you go and put an under the bench commercial dishwasher that can create that amount of steam in 2 minutes and keep doing that time in, time out in a commercial setting, that's a commercial setting. I hope that answers the question. Somebody's
that 8 kilowatt load piece, is that relevant here?
That is one of the worst pieces of AS 1668. It is the bane marie of my existence. The 8 kilowatt rule applies to a single device, and when you have more than one device, you need to apply the 0.5 kilowatts a square meter. What is not described for anyone's satisfaction is what am I measuring the 0.5, the area on. So there was a whole spate of interpretations, dare I say it, that came out of Brisbane City Council, and these operators were putting a dishwasher into a separate room so that they didn't have to have ventilation applied to it. And that's an example of, I think the wrong application for this standard. But it's all about whether there's one appliance or many appliances, and to always be safe, you should probably always apply the 500 watts per square meter. We apply it based on the kitchen floor area. So usually there's a tiled area where food preparation is being undertaken. And that's how we generally apply it. I'm sure that could be abused. I'm sure that you could go into some places like a Woolworths kitchen, which has a lot of area and not a lot of cooking devices. And somebody smart could say, we don't need to put anything in. I think somebody quite helpfully put into the chat here that the overriding arching piece is in the building code, which is about not causing nuisance or harm to people. And then within the AS 1668 code, it talks about not allowing the distribution of aerosols beyond the immediate vicinity of the cooking and the cleaning.
Thanks, Rob. We are over time, but we still have quite a few questions, so I might keep going if everyone's happy. Feel free to drop off if you're not. But next question is from Michael Jones. I think part of this has sort of been answered, but might need a bit more clarification. Jospa, Mebrasa, etc., all have spark arresters on their flue, so charcoal ovens. In Europe, this seems to be acceptable to be under shared appliance canopy. Is there any likelihood of this changing in the future? Also, can you clarify the distance separation between the solid fuel section of the regular section of the canopy should there be a clear defining solid vertical wall between the two sections?
Akram, I reckon you could take this one.
So, so essentially the question is what the separation distance between your solid fuel appliance and a normal appliance needs to be? Is that correct?
Yeah. So where you've got a Josper and you've got the spark arrestor on it, what's the distance from, for example, the spark arrestor to the filter? And
Or was it between appliances? I think
it was between appliances, a solid vertical section between appliances.
I'm sorry, I can't see the questions. No problem. The chat box. So provided they've got separate hoods, we allow for at least a 400 mil infill bench between the two appliances, so that you've got your 200 mil overhang between them. Now, it is recommended to have a panel as such to try and enclose those embers, because you don't want those embers to fly into a grease filtering hood. So the recommendation is to have panels on all three sides, on the rear and the left and the right, if possible. But if it isn't, there's a 400 mil infill bench in between where the hoods can join over is the minimum.
Thanks. I'll move on to, again, another oven overhang question. Can you provide clarity around the standard oven front overhang, not combi or pizza oven? And is the distance 300 millimeter from the door or 450 millimeter from the oven?
So the Australian standard talks about side hinge doors or bottom hinge doors. So with a side hinge door, you've got your 450 mil overhang from when the door is closed. So that's the front of the oven to the inside of the hood. And if it's a bottom hinged door, like a deck oven or even a Josper oven, like you mentioned before, it's 300 mil from when the door is open. So from the horizontal leading edge of the door to the inside of the hood.
Thanks. I'll quickly race through some of these others. You mentioned before the overhang for a dishwasher canopy is 300 millimeters. Chad says this is incorrect as it falls under non-grease producing equipment. However, you can adopt 300 millimeter overhang and reduce the airflow 2.1 meters per second.
That is correct. You can reduce the airflows if you've got the 300 mil overhang.
Yeah. Also a question about the distance from filters, I believe. Would a plancher and target top be treated as a solid grill plate? Maybe that's one for Enzo.
I don't know what those things are. I'm sorry. I don't know what a plancher is.
So what was that first one?
A plancher.
I don't know what that is, but a target top. It's been a bit of a
flat grill.
Sorry?
A plancha is a flat grill. The only difference is that it can have a water around to clean the grease, but that's basically a flat grill. Nothing different.
So if it's a flat grill, as in a solid grill plate, you would expect it to be treated the same as a solid grill plate, and 600 would apply. You would think. The target top is an interesting one, which has been discussed at length by the AG6 committee. At the moment, it's listed as 1350, but we are taking into consideration that the target tops can be a solid plate, but they also have removable sections which exposes a naked flame. So what is being proposed in the next edition, which is currently going through a ballot process as we speak, is that it'll be 1050. And that is because you can remove the two semicircular plates and have an exposed naked flame and cook that way.
Thanks. Almost to the end now. Kathy Goodwin's made a comment, which is probably in line with what Rob said before, which is, I believe we have experts in every field and we should engage these experts or advise our clients to engage those experts to provide the final advice and interpretation of the standards and codes. I think that's their summary. Chris, that's the biggest issue. I'm not sure which issue this was, Chris, but The health inspector says AS 1668 Part 2 2012, and so does the building surveyor, and yet the code is grey and the hood manufacturer and the mechanical engineer seldom agree. As a consultant, we regularly are the referee. Very similar point as well, I think. And I think last comment I've got, unless there's any questions we want to ask, Clause 3 of AS 1668 Part 2, this is Marcel again, by the way, has overriding requirement to not cause hazard or annoyance to persons in the building, neighbours or members of the public. All other sub-clauses need to be interpreted in relation to this statement. Rob, you agree with that one?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
So I'll just ask, there's no more in the chat. I'll just ask if anyone does have any more questions, feel free to put your hand up. Otherwise, we might try and wind it up. We're 10 minutes late, but it's all very healthy conversation.
Hi, Kerry. Just to add to the comment I made, I guess I ask everyone here, the manufacturers of hoods have been providing, or manufacturers have been providing certification that's used by the environmental health officers for the sign-off where there are no mechanical consultant involved, and more recently when there is mechanical consultant involved. I guess my question is, whose is accepted? Is it the manufacturer of the hood providing the AS 1668.2 2012 certificate, or is it the mechanical engineer that has to provide that? What is, I guess there's a bit of ambiguity on a lot of projects that we've been involved in, that quite often that's the only document submitted is the manufacturer's.
Thanks, Chris. I'll let Rob answer that one. You had your hand up then for a sec.
Yeah, so thank you, Chris. The approval authorities, be it either the health department or the certifier, are looking for a credentialed person, which is almost always a mechanical consultant. In New South Wales, they used to have a system which they did not police, where the mechanical engineer had to be a C9 or a C10. So that's a mechanical or a fire engineer. In other jurisdictions, they had to be a degree qualified or a chartered engineer or a registered engineer of either Victoria or Queensland bodies. So that's the, if you like, that's the answer that goes to a judge or a court. The truth is that when manufacturers are providing solutions, we should be recognizing that they are using often advanced engineering techniques. So Akram is from Eco Canopy, they do that. Marcel is from Halton, they do that. There are other people, Jacques Marin, we've worked with him on ventilated ceilings. Each of these manufacturers are exploiting a technology, and the code allows that to happen, and it's a separate compliance pathway. So I can comply by following these overhangs and these exact dimensions and so on, or I can ask a manufacturer to provide a supplier certification, and that's a separate compliance pathway. Notwithstanding that, all Akram or Jacques or Marcel will be certifying is that the hood functions. The other things that the certifier wants to know is the discharge okay? Is the section J correct? Is the seismic restraint of the hood correct? Is there a noise problem? And all of these other kind of site-based installation problems or requirements should be managed correctly by a credentialed designer. I have seen some food service design architects step into that ring. I hope for their sake they have professional indemnity insurance, because basically they're making an assurance on to the public that this is to code. You saw Opal Towers and you saw the whole fallout from that. This is being clamped down on by governments. In the last 18 months, Queensland, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria have all tightened up dramatically who can provide certification for design.
Thanks, Rob. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I mean, it's a bit of an industry issue because quite a few projects end up with an environmental health officer sign off on something that's signed, has a CDC from a building surveyor, but no mechanical advice, throughout the project. And to me, that's dangerous.
It is.
Very dangerous.
There is one more question on the chat, and then I might try and wind it up. Chad's asked, how do canopies with internal flat sections comply to the food code? Akram?
We don't build canopies with flat sections, so I'm not familiar with how they do comply, to be honest. I'm not sure if Rob might have the answer to that question.
Yes, so we were involved with Coanda developing their hood, their Coanda hood. It used to have a very long flat section, but it also had a filter shape that had a cup, and the air pattern that was created basically dragged air across that horizontal section. The test, as far as the code is concerned, is the prevention or prohibition of any condensation. The Australian standard says, you may have condensation and therefore you've got angles that are fairly steep that allow that drainage to occur. Many hoods that come from a manufacturer, they are covered by the manufacturer's compliance pathway. And basically that pathway says, we've satisfied ourselves that this point about condensation has been taken care of. I think I've seen almost every hood known to man have condensation issues underneath a freezer. They leave the top open and they're cooking, suitcases of pasta at a time. That sort of condensation load is obviously a threat and may not probably be satisfied by a flat lid.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. I mean, I'll wind up there if I can. I'm aware that some people may feel some questions need to be asked further. Feel free to send those through to NAFIS and we can distribute those out to various people here and we might be able to get some further comment. It's obviously a very complicated area. There's a lot of holes seemingly in the standard, but I think the key message that I'm hearing loud and clear is that you really need to engage with experts in their field. Mechanical engineers are obviously critical here to protect yourselves, to ensure that you comply to standards and to actually limit risks, which is obviously the intent of the standard in the first place. So I really appreciate Rob's insight in that respect. He's come here voluntarily to help out and really interesting comments. Thank you, Rob. Akram, again, great job also on your presentation, really informative. Thank you very much. Jacques, we didn't cover a lot on ventilated ceilings today, but we are planning to do a future event on that, so thank you. And I'll just, Enzo Alfonsetti wasn't actually necessarily designated as a speaker today, but he contributed a lot of valuable information, so really appreciate Enzo's contribution. I'll just finish up finally on one other point, which is our next webinar, which is actually on fire suppression systems. So not an unrelated topic here, obviously. The planned date for that at the stage is Tuesday, the 24th of May at 11 a.m. Sydney time, which by that stage should be the same for the East Coast, I think. So please be aware of that. We'll send out further information. We also just remind you of the NAFIS CFSP online courses that are coming up. Getting a lot of interest in those courses. So the March course is actually booked out and we have very limited places available in June on the 20th, 21st and 22nd. And then the 7th and 8th of November is available as well. So I'll really encourage anyone in the industry to book if they can. Places are limited and they book up fast, and it's a really important way to share information, to learn about things within the industry, such as complicated topics like this, and to provide that level of professionalism that we're trying to encourage within NAFIS. So again, thank you to all the speakers, but also thank you very much for everyone who's participated with some great questions today. I really appreciate you coming along. I hope to see you in the future seminars. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
you guys.